You know what the most obstacle-proof people you have ever met actually have in common? It is not that fewer things go wrong for them. It is not that they are luckier or more naturally gifted. Things go wrong at the same rate. Something in how they meet those things is simply built differently. Psychology has been studying people who overcome repeatedly, and the findings point consistently away from talent and toward something trainable, something specific, something that shows up in how they think before, during, and after difficulty arrives. This video explains exactly what that something is. The first thing that defines people who overcome every obstacle is that they have made a fundamental decision about their relationship with difficulty before the difficulty arrives. They have decided in advance that hard things are part of the journey and not evidence that the journey is wrong. Research on cognitive appraisal from psychologist Richard Lazarus at the University of California found that how a person interprets a stressful event determines its psychological impact more powerfully than the event itself. People who overcome consistently have trained their first interpretation of difficulty to be neutral or instructive rather than threatening or catastrophic. That trained first response changes everything. The second thing is that they are remarkably clear about what they are moving toward. Not just what they want to escape, not just what they want to avoid. They have a specific, vivid, and personally meaningful destination that remains visible even when the path to it becomes completely unclear. Research on goal clarity and perseverance from Edwin Locke and Gary Latham found that specific and meaningful goals produce dramatically greater sustained effort than vague or externally imposed ones. People who overcome obstacles consistently are not running from difficulty. They are running toward something, and that toward orientation functions as a compass that stays accurate even in the middle of a storm. The third thing is that they have developed an almost uncomfortable level of honesty about their current situation. They do not minimize what is happening. They do not catastrophize it either. They see it clearly, name it accurately, and begin working with the reality they have rather than mourning the reality they expected. Psychologist Martin Seligman's research on explanatory style found that individuals who describe adversity accurately, neither exaggerating nor dismissing its severity, recover significantly faster and attempt more solutions than those at either extreme. Clear seeing is not pessimism. It is the most pragmatic cognitive tool available when something real needs to be solved. The fourth thing is that they are students of their own past obstacles. Every previous difficulty they have navigated has been stored not as a painful memory to avoid, but as a case study in what they are capable of. They reference it consciously when new difficulty arrives as evidence that they have done hard things before. Research on self-efficacy from Albert Bandura at Stanford University found that the strongest predictor of future persistence through difficulty is a history of mastery experiences, previous occasions where the individual overcame a genuine challenge. People who overcome consistently are building a personal archive of proof. Each obstacle survived becomes part of the argument for attempting the next one. The fifth thing is that they manage their energy across the duration of difficulty rather than burning everything at the start. Most people respond to an obstacle with a surge of intense effort that depletes them before the obstacle is resolved. People who overcome consistently pace themselves. They understand that some problems require sustained effort over weeks or months. Research on cognitive depletion from Roy Baumeister found that self-regulatory capacity functions like a muscle that fatigues under extended use and recovers with rest. People who consistently overcome long obstacles have learned to work with their energy cycles rather than against them. They rest deliberately and early, not after they have already run out. That timing makes an enormous practical difference. The sixth thing is that they build and maintain relationships with people who have already overcome what they are currently facing. Not simply for motivation, for specific, practical, transferable knowledge. They understand that someone who has already navigated the particular obstacle in front of them holds information that no amount of independent thinking can fully replicate. Research on social learning theory from Albert Bandura found that observational learning, watching and communicating with people who model desired behavior, accelerates skill acquisition significantly more than independent trial and error. People who overcome do not reinvent every wheel. They find someone who has already solved the specific problem, and they learn from that solution before adding their own judgment to it. Now, consider this for a moment. Think of the largest obstacle you have ever faced and ultimately moved through. Now ask yourself what that experience actually built in you. Not what it cost, what it built. Because there is something inside you right now that only exists because of the difficulty you survived. And you may have been calling it by the wrong name all along. The seventh thing is that they have an extremely short window between being knocked down and beginning to stand back up. Not because they feel less pain. The pain is real, and they feel it fully. But they have learned, through repeated experience, that the time spent horizontal does not reduce the difficulty of what comes next. So they shorten it. Research on resilience from psychologist George Bonanno at Columbia University found that the defining characteristic of highly resilient individuals is not the absence of distress after adversity, but the speed of functional recovery. The resilient person still falls. The variable that separates them is not if they fall, but how quickly they choose to begin returning to full engagement with their life. The eighth thing is that they redefine what the obstacle is actually asking of them. When most people see a wall, they look for a way around it or they stop moving entirely. People who overcome consistently ask what this obstacle is requiring them to become. They treat each difficulty as a developmental demand rather than simply a logistical problem. Psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun at the University of North Carolina spent decades studying post-traumatic growth, the measurable positive psychological change that emerges from the struggle with highly challenging life circumstances. They found that the key variable was not the severity of the obstacle, but whether the person asked what the experience was asking them to build. That question transforms the entire nature of the encounter. The ninth thing is that they separate the solvable from the unsolvable with unusual clarity and speed. They do not spend emotional energy on the parts of a situation that are genuinely outside their influence. They identify precisely what they can affect, and they focus there completely. That separation is not resignation. It is cognitive efficiency operating at a very high level. Research from psychologist Salvatore Matti on psychological hardiness found that individuals who distinguish clearly between controllable and uncontrollable elements of adversity show significantly lower stress responses and significantly higher problem-solving effectiveness. The mentally hardy person is not passive about what they cannot change. They are simply refusal to allow it to consume the energy that the changeable parts actually need. The 10th thing is the one that makes every other quality on this list sustainable over a lifetime. People who overcome every obstacle have built a stable and honest sense of who they are that does not depend on outcomes to remain intact. When something fails, they are still themselves. That continuity of identity is the deepest source of their endurance. Research on identity and resilience from psychologist Dan McAdams at Northwestern University found that individuals who have constructed a coherent and stable personal narrative, a clear story about who they are, where they came from, and what they stand for, demonstrate significantly greater resilience across multiple domains of adversity. Identity is not just self-concept. It is the structural foundation everything else is built upon. When the foundation is solid, difficulty cannot reach the level where the person lives. Now, consider this for a moment. Every person who consistently overcomes began somewhere. There was a first obstacle that felt impossible. A first moment of genuine uncertainty about whether they would make it through. The version of them that overcomes consistently now was not the version that faced that first thing. It was built by facing it. The overcoming created the overcomer. There is something worth understanding about the arc of a person who overcomes every obstacle. It does not begin with exceptional resources or perfect circumstances or extraordinary natural ability. It begins with a single decision to engage honestly with the first difficult thing rather than waiting for better conditions that may never arrive. From that first honest engagement comes evidence. Small and imperfect evidence that they can move through difficulty. And that evidence becomes the seed of the archive. The archive grows with each subsequent obstacle. And eventually the archive is so full of survival that the prospect of a new obstacle stops producing fear and starts producing something closer to readiness. The people who overcome most consistently are not fearless. They experience the same anticipatory dread that everyone else does when something large and threatening appears on the horizon. The difference is that they have enough evidence stored from their own history to make the fear less persuasive than it used to be. The evidence speaks louder than the fear. What psychology has consistently found is that the capacity to overcome is not distributed at birth in fixed quantities. It is developed through contact with difficulty that is engaged honestly. Every person reading this has already developed some version of it simply by having lived. The question is whether you have been recognizing it and building on it or overlooking it entirely. The people who seem to overcome everything are often simply the people who have been keeping better track of their own history of overcoming, who have been consciously building the archive, who treat each difficulty not as an interruption to life, but as the material from which a more capable version of themselves is being constructed in real time. Think back to where we began. The observation that obstacle-proof people are not experiencing fewer obstacles. They are meeting the same world with a different internal architecture. That architecture is not mysterious. It is a specific set of cognitive habits and relational choices practiced consistently over time until they become the default response to difficulty rather than the exceptional one. The final truth that psychology returns to again and again is this. Every person who has ever overcome something impossible looked, in the moment before they overcame it, like someone who might not. The overcoming does not announce itself in advance. It simply happens when a person with enough of the right habits meets a moment that finally needs them. And that person could be you far more than you currently believe.